One of the questions I often get is it possible to have as strong a relationship virtually? Can you build that trust? Can you build that strength relationship virtually as in person? And my answer to that is yes, it's about taking initiative. The thing all these conversations are missing is that regardless of whether people work from home, the office, anywhere in between, we are all now virtual communicators. The old way of the office was if you had a question, you'd go to your coworker's cubicle or office and ask them. Now, even when we're sitting just 2 feet away from someone, instead we send a Slack or an instant message when we have a question. The other big problem that I'll often see is that...
All right, Andrew. Well, I'm super excited to have you here today. We're going to talk to you, learn your story, and also I've got your book here, Ping, The Secrets of Successful Virtual Communication. And the thing is that communication just isn't one way anymore, but we all, in any way of life, can become better at communication. And I love that. I love that you're out there teaching people. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So I'm interested. I know you've been in this world of communications for a while, but what drove you to make sure that this message got out to everybody? And I know I would imagine COVID was probably a game changer for so many people, but what was the turning point for you?
Yeah, so for me, the turning point actually happened much earlier in my life. We all have, for most of us, some pivotal moment that we feel like set us down a certain path or another. And for me, mine actually happened when I was 16. I was in high school, starting to think about applying for college. And I'd been feeling sick for just a couple of weeks, but I was feeling worse and worse. And it was the weekend and I was looking really pale. So my parents decided to bring me to the ER just to like make sure everything was okay because I was going somewhere on Monday. And we sat there for a while. They did some tests. And then after a short time, a doctor came into the room with this like grim look on her face, like that look you don't want to see. And the doctor told me, you have cancer. And for most people, we kind of cope with these things weird and differently. For me, I detached in the moment because it didn't seem real that as a 16-year-old, I had leukemia in this case, a blood cancer. And so I started thinking about like, what must it be like for this doctor to have to tell a 16-year-old that he has cancer? What is that as you're part of your job? And for me, that began my interest in communication, thinking about how do we have not just the harder conversations, but every conversation. And most of us in real life don't have to tell people they have cancer. But in our jobs, in our life, we're often having difficult conversations, having to tell someone they didn't get a promotion. Or if you're, in finance, telling someone they didn't get a loan, or, talking about bad news, and even not just the bad conversations, the good ones. We're often wanting to make a good impression on others. So communication is really, really key. And why the book, why right now? For me, I saw so many conversations happening about remote work. Is it good? Is it bad? Should we do hybrid? And the thing all these conversations are missing is that regardless of whether people work from home, the office, anywhere in between, we are all now virtual communicators. The old way of the office was if you had a question, you'd go to your coworker's cubicle or office and ask them. Now, even when we're sitting just 2 feet away from someone, instead we send a Slack or an instant message when we have a question. And it's not all worse because the old way you'd have to interrupt someone, whatever they were doing whenever you had a question. Now they get to respond when they're done focusing on whatever they do. So it's different, but as a result, the thing we're all missing is that this is now the way we communicate the majority of the time. And I found it valuable to bring research forward about how can we do this better.
It's so interesting to me that you were thinking about the doctor and the doctor's communication, detaching from the moment. I can only imagine how your parents were feeling in that moment and how that communication could impact them and then how they chose to communicate to you. What was that next couple of steps like?
Man, it was all a blur. I got to tell you, there was like a lot of hard conversations that had happened then because it was understanding how serious is it? What do we need to do? I ended up soon thereafter, they realized I would need a bone marrow transplant because it was one of those more serious cases. And this is also part of why virtual communication has been so interesting to me is the bone marrow transplant went great, survived, no cancer since, but I was left with an immune deficiency. So I'm often having to communicate with others from a distance. And so for me, this understanding of how can we do that better was just core to my research interests. So when I went to pursue a PhD, I was like, this is what I want to study. This is what I want to figure out. How can we do it better?
Yeah, it really is. It's so interesting. I do a ton of Zooms and virtual meetings, sometimes ad nauseum, but I do so many of them. And if you show up and you have the right energy, and you're animated, you're empathetically listening. There's so many things, and some people, this thing just draws them down. Like immediately, you're on the computer and they're shutting down and they're getting uncomfortable. That camera's scaring them, and it can be a major major benefit if we focus on enhancing the way we communicate in any way, but virtually today it does seem so powerful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of trade-offs with these different modes. It's on one hand, it's nice being at home behind our screen. We don't have to wear formal pants, or in some cases, some people don't wear anything at all, which I wouldn't suggest. But there's this other side of it that we have this camera facing us that can cause stress. And in real life, you're not staring at yourself on the screen. So we're now more focused on our nonverbal behaviors, making sure we don't have like broccoli in our teeth. And there's was even a fun study that some researchers were curious if there's a way to decrease this self focus. So they had people in one of the conditions of the study drink some alcohol before a meeting to see if that would make them more social and other focused. Uh, Good news, bad news, it didn't work. So the good news is I don't recommend alcohol as a fix for this kind of thing. The bad news is there's not an easy way necessarily to become less stressed in these situations, aside from getting used to it and realizing that other people are focused on themselves much more than they are on you in those situations.
Andrew, if you think about it, think of all the people that don't look in the mirror. I'm always shocked at how many people I talk to, and they're like, "I never look in the mirror. I don't look in the mirror before I leave, or I don't." And now you get to look at yourself all the time. I mean, some people end
Mhm.
up focusing on themselves instead of focusing on the human they're talking to,
Mhm.
and it is a lot of maybe a unique or different way to see yourself, and that could be challenging for people that haven't really spent a lot of time maybe getting comfortable in that space.
Exactly.
It's definitely a unique perspective. I think it's really interesting to me. I was in and have been in finance for 23, 24 years, and what's really interesting is serving clients pre-COVID was so different than post, because there were things that if you had a 75 to 85-year-old, they just wouldn't do. And I don't care, like, you could have tried to email an invite to somebody to go to an event, and they're just not listening. They're not looking at it. They don't care. But when COVID happened and we had all the shutdowns and people were unable to communicate with their grandchildren, their children, they got out of their comfort zone and they started doing things they've never done. It's so amazing to me in our company how many people over the age of 80 today are communicating virtually in ways they never did. And one small story, and then I'll pause and just get some feedback. But I was I have a 95-year-old client, and her best friend had not been able to visit in like 5 years. And she has an iPhone. And I'm at her house and I'm like, "You can call your friend on FaceTime." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "You could call your friend on FaceTime and you could see her again, because she's not gonna be able to come here from New York again. You're not gonna be able to go up there. This travel is making it very difficult." And they were able to talk and communicate prior to her passing through that virtual communication. And so it really is impactful for so many different ways and so many different reasons.
That's a great point. And one of the questions I often get when I'm talking to executives and organizations and consulting is it possible to have as strong a relationship virtually? Can you build that trust? Can you build that strength relationship virtually as in person? And my answer to that is yes, it's about taking initiative. And the example I love to give is if you think about two friends that you have. One of them you see once every 3 or 4 months for 3 hours, let's say. So you see him 3 to 4 times a year for, 3 hours. The other friend you send one text back and forth to every single day. Which friend are you closer to? And I imagine if you're like most people, you're going to say, well, it's the one I text every single day, not the one I see once every 3 or 4 months. And if you think about it, the amount of time spent seeing someone once every 3 or 4 months for 3 or 4 hours is probably more time than you spend sending one single text each day, because that just takes a few seconds. So the actual amount of communication is the same on both sides. But here, frequency is much more important than the depth or the richness of communication in strengthening that relationship. So it's about thinking about how to leverage the strengths of it as opposed to what's necessarily lost when you switch modes.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's super interesting to me how that has evolved and how it's changed. I mean, there are 4 or 5 friends you probably have a text chain right now with where you send the funniest things that you know exist, or it's an Instagram reel that you think is hilarious that you guys grew up talking about, or there's this different way of communicating today that is more constant. And I also think about when I started in business many, many years ago, and the people that you would only talk to on the phone, but you talk to like every week or 3 times a week, and you felt like you knew these people. You knew their
Mhm.
family, you knew what they were doing. Now, you hadn't met them in person, but there was this connection. Now we get to add the ability to see each other, see someone's home, have sometimes kids or dogs run into the frame. Like, life has become a lot more, inclusive to lots of different types of communication. I think it's such a powerful way to think.
Yeah, and virtual communication in many ways is kind of pull back the curtain a bit between our work lives and our personal lives. In many ways, better, as you noted. In some ways, not as ideal because it's separated. It's gotten rid of some of those boundaries between the two. So, pros and cons to all this stuff.
Yeah. Look, I think there's definitely some cons. I have a 16 and a 19-year-old teenager, and sometimes they're sitting on their phones in a room with 4 or 5 of their best friends, and you're like, "Guys, you're in the room together. Like, you don't have to do this." But that's partially how they communicate today, and so it's very unique but different, and we still, I think there's still some great need to be able to do both, but can't we do this one just a little bit better? I think that's the crucial learning curve here.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's different norms of communication with different generations. So, for those of us who are like elder millennial on up, for the most part, the only convenient method of text based communication while we were growing up and when we were entering the workforce was for the most part email. If you wanted to text someone, you had to hit like the number 3 times to get to the letter C. You had to hit each number three times to get to the letter F, and it just wasn't that convenient. So we used email for everything. But so it's not weird just for us to send a social message via email. But for younger generations, the only thing they use email for is for work. So they associate it with only formality. So when you send something not work related via email, it kind of comes off as weird because they can text, Snapchat, whatever else. So we all have these different associations with different modes, and they're not better or worse. They're just different. And another example, one of the ones I think is most interesting is voice notes and voicemails. So if you were to talk to someone in high school or college or just recently graduated, and you were to leave them a voicemail, it's like the worst thing you could do, the biggest communication faux pas. They hate voicemails, but voice notes, which are effectively the same, it's just asynchronous audio communication, not real time. Those are completely normalized. So there's a lot of different associations and norms we have associated with these ways of communicating.
Yeah, I'm a huge voice texter. So, I've been doing it for years,
Mhm.
and, I got to the point where I also hated voicemail. I don't wanna have to go somewhere to check something that I forgot you even called on.
Mhm.
So, like, if you think about it, you get so many notifications, so many interruptions, and I always find it kind of funny when someone does leave a voicemail now, I'm like, "Wow, that's really kind of funny." But it's a generational thing, and the voice texts are very powerful to me because they cut right through the noise. If I wanna call you on your birthday, you're getting a bunch of calls. Hopefully, you're getting a bunch of calls on your birthday, but you get very few messages from people that are on your phone, on your cell phone, connected to the person that's sending it, and I send a voice text all the time, and I am shocked at how many people save those voice texts. They disappear.
Yeah.
James Bond, they like blow up in 10 seconds after you send them, but people can keep them, and so many people keep them, which shows you the value and the interest level of the people that you're communicating with and maybe the message that you left them.
And my own research shows that assuming you're actually authentic, if you're trying to fake it, it's a different story, but you're actually
Yeah.
authentic, the richer the communication mode you use. So choosing voice text instead of just regular texting makes it seem higher effort, makes it seem more authentic. The downside of voice notes is that if it's for something work related that you want to go back to later, it's a pain in the butt for the most part because it's easy to skim through an email. If you have to re-listen to a whole voice note or to try and find something, it can be really annoying. So like when you want to show that like you care, you're authentic, voice notes awesome. When you're trying to relay information, it's probably gonna annoy the other person if you do a voice note generally.
Yeah. It's a great point. I like it when people communicate with me with voice notes, and I will save them, and I always remember those types of things. So I think connection and communication is something that I've always prioritized, that relationship over transaction. So authentic
Mhm.
relationships are really important. And I'll remember, what we talked about, when we talked about it, why we talked about it. So I can go back. So I do leave a lot of those, and I will sometimes leave work ones as well. And I don't think it's as well received. So I would imagine the research is not only correct, but I've seen it to be true.
Yeah.
How are you seeing the research point parents and children into communicating? Because I imagine we talked about the difference between millennials and Gen X and baby boomers. What about this newest generation of parents and their children who are communicating completely differently than each other today?
It's funny. I give the same advice to parents and children that I would give to a CEO and communicating with frontline employees. And the big thing to do is to have conversations about communication. We have so many implicit assumptions that often create problems. A good example of this is research on the email urgency bias, where basically these researchers found that when people receive an email, they think the sender wants a response a lot more quickly than they actually do. So, Scott, if you sent me an email, I'd say, "Oh, this is an important person, podcast host. He probably wants me to respond right away." When in reality, Scott, on your end, you're like, "I've got a million emails in my inbox. I don't care if Andrew gets back to me for another few weeks." And the problem is, this urgency on the recipient side creates a lot of stress. And what they found in their research is that when you include just even something in your message saying, "It'd be great if you could respond to me by X date," to remove that ambiguity, that misunderstanding, it ends up reducing stress. So now I want to take this up a level higher for this advice that I would give is have broad conversations about how do you communicate? What do you communicate over each thing? So, for instance, if it's a work team, you might have a conversation and say, okay, if it's something that needs a response within 24 hours, let's use email. If it's something that needs a response within an hour or two, let's use Slack or instant message. And that's a expectation. We'll respond within an hour or two. If it's emergency or it's after hours and you need a response before the next day, let's do text message or a phone call. And the nice thing about this is a few fold is that it gets everyone on the same page. Everyone knows when you're supposed to respond by, and that expectation is set across the board. And it avoids that awkward situation of after the fact when you sent an email and someone hasn't responded. You're thinking, should I circle back with them? Should I bump it in their inbox? Is that weird? And when you've set those expectations together, it's not weird after 24 hours say, hey, I saw you didn't respond. It'd be great if I could get that information because you've already cleared it with each other that this is the way we communicate. And the same advice that I would do for companies goes to parents and children is talk to each other and actually say, okay, how do we want to communicate different ways? What are the right response expectations here? Just so we're on the same page. And that'll stop you from being on the other end, kind of annoyed they didn't respond in a certain amount of time because you've had communication about your communication.
Yeah. Well, I know kids like to communicate when they wanna communicate. So,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is there's a mood, there's an energy, there's a frequency. I remember being a young kid and really feeling like as the day went on, I was more open to talk about things, and at night, I'd talk to my mom or dad about things that I never would have mentioned 4, 5, 6, 8 hours earlier. And my sons were the same. My oldest son will talk to me as the day goes on, and my youngest son will talk to me first thing in the morning. And so, but the strategy on communication in business and parenting or family is really, I think, valuable because we all have so many different types of chats. I mean, my family has a text chain that when somebody posts something, maybe a win that they're going through, you might be busy at that moment and you want to go back and get to it when you can, but not everybody can get to it right away. And but if you establish those things and you kind of know the boundaries, that's a really great takeaway for people listening. Hey, if I get an email, I need you to respond within X amount of time. And that is the deadline does make for such a better feeling. And you have expectations that you can attain.
And the big part of that is you come to it together collaboratively. So everyone has that buy in. So it's not just a parent saying, you need to respond to my text within 24 hours. You have the conversation with your kid, or if you're CEO, or manager, you have the conversation with your team saying, what do we think is a reasonable amount of time to reply within this? Because when you come to it collaboratively about what makes sense and how do we do it, then everyone is bought into the system there.
What do you see the biggest challenge with communication internally when you're working with companies? So, what is one of the biggest challenges that seems to be recurring that you help people with? I imagine this is one of them, timeline of response.
Yeah.
Are there other things that stand out?
Yeah, so the first one is definitely that norm setting is like, how do we communicate? Because there are some people who respond to emails in 2 weeks, one day, and everyone's got their own expectations that they're setting on each other, and just no one's talking about it. They're just getting annoyed at each other. The other big problem that I'll often see is that they're trying to make everything like face to face communication, as opposed to thinking about what is the advantage of this mode and how do we leverage it. And in my book, I talk about example where my department, it was during COVID, they wanted to do some bonding, so they got a comedian to do like a Zoom comedy session with the department. And it was well intentioned, but it was just so awkward. Here's this comedian. There's 20 professors all on mute. What he's telling jokes, so you can't hear anyone laughing. And also, no one had noted to this comedian, I guess, or maybe the wires got crossed that we were professors. As if not, he was making jokes about elementary school teachers because he thought that we were elementary school teachers, all of us. And so, if it had been in person, he would have realized it was at a university, but it was easy to make that mistake. And no one felt comfortable correcting him. I mean, there was some useful advice there, like, our MBAs might need a little recess every so often. But it ended up creating a good bonding session because my whole department was like texting on the back end. But again, this is like trying to treat a virtual mode like an in person one. And there's a lot of ways to leverage virtual to make it better. So thinking about having more frequent but shorter communication is really useful. Another one, there's research on video meetings, especially when you have larger video meetings. Research shows that opening up the chat and telling people, like, hey, these contributions would be great in chat, make people feel a lot more engaged, and it brings a lot more voices in because you've got a meeting of like 20 people. There's no way everyone's talking, number one. And number two, there's a lot of people in that room who don't feel comfortable speaking up, maybe because they're lower powered or otherwise. So thinking about the strengths of it as opposed to, okay, we're doing a video call. For the first 20 minutes, everyone go around and talk about their weekend. And it just feels forced.
Yeah. It's interesting. We did that probably 8 years ago. We started doing a morning Zoom where we talk about, what everyone's doing and what they did over the weekend. And it's sometimes it just flows and it's awesome. And then other
Mhm.
times it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
The wins and challenge, honestly, the one on the weekend is always pretty easy, but we do one on Fridays, which are wins and challenges. And the wins and challenges, some people are very open to sharing wins. And in fact, they need that affirmation. So they like to do it. But others are very hesitant to share things that are going well. And it's really supposed to be a forum to share that, oh, Andrew and I worked together and he was amazing. Like it's not just about you, it's also about other people that helped with the challenge and it became a win. Um, but yeah, I definitely have seen that forced feeling at times, and it can be challenging in those moments. Um, I also think that when we're doing this this virtual communication, there's a lot of ways. I had a meeting this past week, and I was telling people, I said, I love to get a video update if it's an awareness thing. I don't want
Mhm.
to have a meeting to talk about something that you're just talking at me the whole time. If you're going to talk at me the whole time and there's no need for feedback or interaction or collaboration, send me a video. Like, respond, hey Andrew, I just wanted to reach
Mhm.
out to you. I want to reach out to the entire team. Here's the changes we're doing in restructuring. We know everybody's going to have lots of questions, so we actually have collaborative meetings set up where we can get together and do it this way. And then there's action that comes out of it versus the old like phone call where you're just telling everybody what's going on. Nobody's listening. They have tons of questions, but they haven't received it. And I feel like companies get that part wrong a lot as well. And these are things that you try to open up, and video can really do that for people.
It's a great point. And this is one of the areas I agree with you that I see people getting wrong so often. They're not mindful about their choice of communication. They have a meeting for something, so we always have a meeting for it. It's an email chain that's gone on for 2 weeks, and no one's like, hey, why don't we pick up the phone and resolve this in 5 minutes? We approach our communication thoughtlessly and we get used to using it for certain things, as opposed to taking a moment to stop to think, is this actually the best mode of communication? Maybe it should be something asynchronous. Maybe it should be something that's richer, more like in person. And stopping and thinking, even though it kind of takes a little extra time, can save you a tremendous amount of time on the back end because you don't need to have 20 people in a meeting they don't need to be there for because you could have sent an email. Or you have this email chain, as I noted, that kept going on and on that could have been resolved by a 2 minute phone call. So taking that approach and actually stopping a question is one of the easiest ways to improve your communication productivity.
Yeah, in leadership, one of my biggest pet peeves and frustrations generationally is the younger generation's um, infatuation with sending an email or a text or a a non face to face or phone call communication for something that they could have handled in 30 seconds. So if
Yeah.
I need to know the answer to something really quick, and I call someone and they're like, "Oh, I'll check it out." And then they call me back like, "Hey, I went ahead and sent an email. I haven't gotten a response yet." And
Yeah.
now it's like 2 days, and it was a decision we could have gotten done in 30 seconds if we just picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Andrew, what color are you gonna go with on the cover of your book? Do you prefer the light blue or the darker blue?" Like, what was the I don't need to have a dissertation about it. I just need to
Yeah.
quickly understand where your head was at.
Yeah, and those lags from the asynchronous, the non-real time communication, like email, text, Slack, those can be problematic in some cases. In some cases, it's nice to have them because if you're calling people for every single question you have, people work for you would never get anything done probably. So it's
Yeah.
about thinking about when is it worth one versus the other, of course.
How have you found yourself using what you've learned in your own life, with your own family, with your own, social circles? What have you seen yourself utilizing a little bit more? Maybe have any changes that you've made?
I've noticed I've become a lot more careful about not making my own assumptions. And when I'm not clear about something, just asking. It's so easy to have misinterpretations when you just only have a text of a message. One of the ones that was particularly salient for me was during my PhD. This professor, very high powered professor, he was from Wharton, and he used at the end of every message was ellipses, so the dot dot dot. And so it would be like, good work, dot, dot, dot. And I'd be like, oh, I guess I like messed that up. And so like I felt stressed about it for like every time this happened for months. And eventually one day I just asked the professor, I'm like, am I messing something up? Like, am I misreading this? And he was like, no, no, no. I just meant to be continued. Like, I'm really enjoying the conversation. I want it to be continued. And so whenever that happens, because email has this negative shift, because we're all so focused, we're worried what we said didn't go over carefully, worried about our jobs, worried about the relationship, we infuse that negativity into our interpretation. So if it's ever there, just asking helps eliminate that false negativity in many cases. So I've started now, whenever I'm not sure, I'm like, hey, just want to check. What do you mean here? And that eliminates so much of the misinterpretation.
It's that curiosity. Leading with curiosity can always kind of alleviate some of the stress that relationships might have if we just, in general, in any communication, lead with that curiosity. It can be
Mhm.
very, very powerful. And I know it's funny because I'm also a thumbs upper. Like if I'm just acknowledging something, I just thumbs up it. Like I don't even respond. I'm just like thumbs up. And like I've been asked before, like, why are you just thumbs upping? Is that a
Mhm.
yes? Is that a like? Is that a let's go? Like, what are you saying? And in my brain, I'm perfectly clear about what I was saying, but it's not perfectly clear in the response.
One of the exercises I do with my MBA students that research on emotion emails based on, it's I basically replicate this study with my students that was done by a Stanford researcher, where basically you take two people and anyone can try this with like a friend, your spouse, a child, whoever. One person taps a song on the desk with their fist, and then they guess what percent likelihood will the other person guess that song. And in this study, people were like, 80, 90% or 60%. Well, there's a good chance they're going to get definitely better than even. And in reality, it was like 5% of people guessed the song. And the problem is that when we're tapping a song on the desk, we hear the music in our ears. We hear it's very clear to us. The problem is for the other person on the other side, all they're hearing is tap, 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 tap. And so then when researchers tried this with email, where they basically had participants in this lab study, and they said, we want you to communicate an emotion to somebody else, whether it's humor, sarcasm, anger, happiness. And then they asked them, what percent likelihood do you think the other person's going to get your emotion? And they guessed very high. But the recipients were nowhere near as accurate in guessing. And it's a similar thing. When we're typing an email, a text message, an instant message, we hear the emotion in our heads. The other person, they're coming from a different set of information, assumptions. And to like the example, Scott, you were given, I actually talked to a pair of employee and manager at a publisher, and I asked them separately about an email chain that they had. And it was a message, a very simple one: good work, but I think we can continue to improve this, with a smiley face. The manager sent that. And the manager was like, this was a great communication. Like, I was trying to be collaborative. I had the emoji here. And the person who worked for that manager said, this was such a condescending and sarcastic email. Like, this was not a we, this was a me. They're trying to, and then this emoji at the end was sarcastic. Like, I spent so long doing this, and this is the message I got. And the thing is, when you're lower powered, you're nervous, you're anxious, and that's what gets infused there, that negativity. So trying to be as explicit as possible, and sometimes moving to that richer mode, not email to avoid that miscommunication, is the right choice.
Yeah, I find myself being very intuitive when it comes to communication and also aware of mistakes. And so if I do like a thumbs up or I responded in a very like quick way, I will sometimes come back with a voice text and say something. Let's use that example. Hey, by the way, I think everything can be better. So that's not a
Yeah.
personal example. That's just me
Yeah.
working to help us become better every day, but the reality is you killed it. You did awesome. I just want to make sure I reiterate that because maybe I didn't communicate that properly. And that coupled with the other message goes a long way. And people will often come in and say, "Thank you for clarifying that because I did not receive it that way."
And that's awesome. And even if you communicate in advance with your team, like thumbs up means for me, like, I love it. And so they're not guessing about it. There's so much guessing because people just don't talk about it in advance. But again, like, if you can imagine, for someone who works for you, for instance, who's like afraid of their job, or they really want a promotion, they spent like so long on something, and they get a thumbs up, they may not interpret it the right way. So communicating about it beforehand, what thumbs up actually means for you, like, I love it, great work. So they're not guessing. So you remove the guessing, or pairing it with that really higher effort message is a great choice there.
Yeah, it's funny. Email to me is so annoying because it gets so long-winded and I get so many of them that it gets to
Yeah.
the point where like every question that comes in that's an email, I'm like, if it's not urgent or it's not super important, I don't even want to answer it. I will like if it's urgent, get to me with something that if it's a detailed list of something, I'm all for taking it and reviewing it. Or if I need record of it, or and something as simple as if I'm CC'd, that means that I don't need to respond. But if I'm the head, then I need to respond. And so I might CC my team members and then say, "Hey, they'll take it on from here. I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge this. Thanks so much." But it's just communicating that. That was something my assistant and I did right away. Is I said, "Listen, if I CC you, it's for awareness. I'm not CCing you for action. But if
Mhm.
I send it to you, it's for action. So if I need clarity, then we can come up with this better strategy from there."
One of the things you're kind of noting there is about this problem that happens in email, especially because email doesn't have norms associated with keeping it short, is called overcrafting. If you've ever had to write an email to someone important, whether it's an executive or a really big client or whoever else, you've probably had that experience where you spent like hours writing a single message, just writing it, rewriting it over again, and it's just stressful. And the thing about this overcrafting, and what some of my research suggests, is that there's what's called this curvilinear effect in terms of the outcomes of crafting and outcomes. So the idea is it's this upside down U, where too little time spent crafting an email means it goes over badly because you've got typos and it's just a really poorly message. But on the other side of it, if you spend too much time over crafting a message, it also can worsen outcomes. It not only makes you anxious, but the other person is less doesn't like your message as much. And if you've been on the other side of one of these overcrafted messages where it's 3 paragraphs too long, there's a lot of "I hope you don't mind," but or and it just you could feel the anxiety oozing through. It goes badly. You want to try and get that sweet spot where you're not just shooting off something without rereading it, but you also don't want to have this overly long, overly crafted message. But because we get so nervous, especially for those people who are lower powered in an organization or in a relationship or whatever else, we tend to go overboard with that crafting of messages.
Well, and now you have ChatGPT. So
Yeah.
now not only are they overcrafting the message, but after they've gotten it perfect and they've written it 7 times, now they're popping it into chat and, they're getting those special M dashes, and then they're saying, "I don't wanna sound this way, I wanna sound this way," and now they're over analyzing words that aren't even their own anymore, and so it could become, very unique. How do you see AI changing the world of virtual communication?
Yeah, AI is the hot topic. Clearly have a strong opinion on it. I wrote a op-ed for Time Magazine titled "Don't Let AI Write Your Emails," to kind of give away where I stand at the beginning. But my view on this, for the messages that matter, it's problematic to have use AI's words. And maybe 99% of the time, the other side won't realize used AI. But 1% of the time, they probably will. Maybe it uses words you don't normally use, like prolific, or maybe there's M dashes or exclamation marks or punctuation that you just don't normally use. Or maybe you and I talked in person and you talked about, or the other person talked about how, it's Monday and that weekend they had a bad weekend because their whole family had a stomach bug. And then a few hours later, you send them an AI generated email that starts with, "I hope you had a great weekend!" exclamation mark. And that gives it away. And the problem is
Right.
AI doesn't know everything that's in your head, at least until we get brain chips or Elon Musk kind of works that out, which is questionable. But there's always gonna be this information gap between you and AI that something may slip in that it misses because you already know it. And if you're not reading it carefully, that can happen. And the issue is, if one time out of 100 the other person realizes used AI to communicate with them, they're going to question every virtual communication you've had with them. Has it been AI in the past emailing me, instant messaging me? Have they used AI scripts and video calls? And if they're starting to question if they've just been communicating with AI the whole time, the next question they're going to ask is, why are they communicating with you in the first place? And that is a question you do not want people asking. All that said, there's great uses for AI in communication to help you brainstorm, to help you edit. For non important, repetitive interactions, sure, use AI. But for those ones that matter, you definitely want to make sure those words are your own because the risk is way too high if it backfires.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, authenticity is really the crucial part of all communication, and if you're
Mhm.
removing authenticity and now you've taken away the personal touch, it can become very dangerous.
Mhm.
I love AI because I've hated making presentations my entire life, and I hate relying on someone else to build it the way I want. And
Mhm.
now I can literally pop the entire dialogue, everything I want into an AI platform, and I can get a killer presentation. And when I do
Mhm.
keynotes, I'll often use these presentations and say, now, just right out of the gate, I took 30 seconds to make this presentation. Now, I did not take 30 seconds to build it, but it took
Yeah,
30 seconds to actually give you these slides. So, here's the program I used. Write it down if you want to use it. And it's amazing how people come up to me afterwards like, oh my God, that is so much better than anything I've been doing before. But I used to rely on a marketing department or somebody to help me build it, or it wasn't the right way. And you had 7 iterations. And now it's like, oh, AI can help you do these things. So
exactly.
that's where it's fun.
Mhm, mhm.
So are
Yeah,
are you seeing that a challenge in the university setting? Like, how do you delineate some of that? Because I think these kids are growing up, and this is the first generation. Um, the way I look at it real quickly is when I went to college in 1996, there was an intro to email course. We had
mhm,
DOS-based blinking green lines, and it was like I remember sending my mom an email for the first time at her job, and that was the we it was nobody had the if you had a personal computer, you were very well off, and you were doing things like you might do a report on the personal computer,
mhm.
but even that was, like, few and far between. We were still not allowed to use internet resources at all for anything that we researched, and then within 4 years, that flipped. Within 4 years, it was everybody was plugged in every dorm room. You had, connectivity across the entire campuses, across the country, across the world.
Mhm.
And, something as simple as my fantasy football league went from being manual to being tracked online, and it made it so much easier and so much more fun and so much more interactive. And I think today we're in that revolution, that metamorphosis moment where like it's the beginning of something and everyone's a little unsure of how to use it, and some are using it too much and some are maybe using it too little. But I'm interested in your
Yeah,
feedback from college.
yeah, AI can superpower you. It can give you a lot of information that we didn't have access to, especially now, more recently, where search engines have gotten lower in quality because everyone's using SEO. So it's just hard to find the information you need. AI is really bringing back that ability to learn information even better than it used to be. The one thing to be wary of that we're also seeing across education, and this was a topic that was researched before AI was even in place, and it's about technology in general. And the topic is called, or the term is called cognitive offloading. And the central idea behind this is that you use technology to take care of a task for you. And the problem with that is that you tend to learn less and remember less. So, bringing this directly to communication topic, let's think about an example of AI note takers during meetings. They're great to have an AI note taker during meeting because you can focus on what the person is saying, you can interact more, and you know those notes are saved somewhere else in a really nice, organized way, which is a very big positive. There are two downsides to this, though. One is, first off, if it's not a meeting you're actively communicating and talking in, you're more likely to zone out the whole meeting, is the first issue, and not be a participant. The second issue is that even if you're a participant in the meeting, if you know that there's an AI note taker jotting everything down, you're less likely to commit everything that's said during the meeting to memory because you know you can access those notes easily elsewhere after the meeting. The problem is when your manager or the client talks to you in person and asks you a question that was discussed during the meeting, and you don't remember it because you cognitively offloaded AI, you know the notes are saved on a folder in your computer, and you're in person, you can't be like, let me go check my notes on my computer because it will show you didn't pay attention, you didn't learn, you didn't remember. So there's this point you want to be careful about is you want to use AI to improve your productivity, to help with your learning, but for those things that are important that you understand yourself, whether it's concepts, learning, or just something you talked about, realizing that leaning on AI makes it less likely that you're going to retain that information because your brain realizes it doesn't need to.
Yeah, it's so true. I've been in meetings where I know it's being recorded and I miss one and I come back and I'm like, why am I even in this meeting? I could just
Mm-hmm.
read the notes, and if I'm not needed, I don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does make you less interactive, but maybe your input is very important in those meetings. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing I would say about communication is I find it phenomenal for me to brainstorm because I'm an out loud thinker. So I can pop open chat or one of these programs, and I can voice talk, and I can just say, "Hey, I need you to ask me these questions because I need to better understand where this theory is. Break it apart. Tell me why I'm not thinking about it correctly. Like, what are some of the things I need to be more curious about? This is my concept. What am I not looking at?" And
Mhm.
I really vet out and brainstorm so many things that I used to have to do with someone else. And I know that that's sometimes not positive, but man, the productivity is so much more valuable, and I absolutely love it.
So I wouldn't disagree that that's not positive. There's a question about what stage of brainstorming you're doing. So research shows that you have a group then you want to do brainstorming with. The initial idea generation phase is better done separately for three reasons. One, let's say you have a group of 10 people and you want each person to come up with 20 ideas. If you were each saying your ideas in person, you'd be there for hours with 10 people saying 20 ideas. Whereas if you're just typing them down separately and individually, you could do it very quickly. So there's immediate productivity gains. The second issue is that when everyone's staring at you in the room, you're nervous about saying something way too divergent because everyone's judging you. So you're less likely to say that idea that's really out there, which is not good for brainstorming. And lastly, if we're sitting in a group and Scott, you say an idea before me, suddenly I'm after you. My brain is now stuck on your idea. So I'm just thinking about variations of your idea as opposed to something really unique because I'm now anchored in the idea you said.
Right.
So for that early stage brainstorming, research suggests it's better to be done asynchronously, separately, often via text. But for the latter stage brainstorming, which is what you're talking about, which is working through an idea or just as a group selecting which of the ideas to do, that's when you want to meet synchronously because that's when you want that back and forth. That's when you want to make the idea better. That's when you need to come up with a decision as a group. That's when that real time interaction is useful. And like this is an example of thinking about, okay, what do we need done and which mode is going to fit best there for that part of the interaction.
That's great. How are you teaching the students to leverage and utilize it the right way? So what are the big rocks that you want them to come out of as a communication specialist, as somebody that's out there, writing and researching and helping this world? How are you helping them in that realm?
My ideal answer is to do it lots and lots of ways, but if I had to summarize it, I like to in my book Ping, I have the Ping framework to keep it easy to remember, but I like to leave people with a framework because it makes it easier to remember all the takeaways because they all tie into this concept of this framework. So the framework Ping, P for perspective taking, I for initiative, N for nonverbal, G for goals. So the P for perspective taking centers on this idea that when we're interacting virtually, we're often more self-focused because we're just staring at the text of the email. Or even on video, we're just staring at a small square of the other person, as opposed to the person standing right in front of us. And as a result, we're less likely to think about how are they going to interpret this? How are they going to react? How might they misinterpret this? And this gets back to what you and I talked about with emotion misinterpretation. We don't realize they're coming from a different position. The I is initiative, which is you want to take that step to think about not just this mode is worse than in person in this way, but how can I fill that back in? So many people just accept that mode's worse, so we can't do anything about it. There's really cool research showing that email based or text based negotiations, they're worse than in person. It's not surprising. There's less trust, less rapport built. But they found that when they had text based negotiators engage in a 5-minute schmoozing call right before the negotiation, that they did just as good as in person ones. They improved their outcomes for not just them, but their counterparty. They built that trust, that rapport. So thinking about how can we take the initiative to fill in what's missing is very vital. Ends for nonverbal because there are so many different nonverbal cues we don't think about when it comes to interacting virtually. My research shows typos can relay emotion. There's emojis, of course. Even via video, what is your background? How is that interpreted? Eye contact, should you be staring at your camera or not? The understanding the science behind all these different nonverbal cues virtually is really important to ensuring that your message comes across as you intend. And lastly, G for goals. I wish I could say there was one best mode of communication. It would make for a very easy conversation, but there isn't. You and I have already talked about in many ways for brainstorming, for other things. Sometimes one mode is better, sometimes another one is. Another big example is cameras on versus cameras off video calls. It's a question I get all the time. And the research suggests that Cameras on is useful for early relationships because it's hard to build trust if you don't know what the person looks like, their mannerisms. And it's useful for showing that you're engaged, even though you may not be. It looks like I'm looking at you now, Scott, but because we're both on camera, but in reality, I may have my dinner recipes up in front of me for all you know, but it looks like I'm more engaged at least. On the other side of that, cameras off is beneficial because we get exhausted when we're on camera. We talked about there's this stress that happens with it. Zoom fatigue or video conferencing fatigue is often what researchers call it. So, kind of the takeaway here is if it's an early stage interaction or one where showing engagement matters, cameras on is better. But if you have an existing team where everyone knows everyone, we all know everyone's engaged, cameras off may be better because it allows everyone to relax a little bit, breathe a little easier, have more energy to focus on the conversation at hand and their work after the meeting so they don't have this spillover fatigue. So, bringing it all together, pretty much everything we talked about fits into this framework of P for perspective taking, I for initiative, N for nonverbal, G for goals. And for me, when I can give people something really memorable that they can apply to their own communication, feels like the most useful thing I can do when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I have a copy of the book right here for those of you that are looking at us on YouTube. If you're listening, it's called Ping, The Secrets of Successful Virtual Communication. And Andrew, how do they find you? How do they find, I'm sure the book's everywhere. I got it on Amazon, so I'm sure everyone
Yeah.
can get it anywhere. But what are the ways they can find more of you and learn from you?
Sure. Yeah. So the book is available wherever books are sold. You can feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Also, the consulting group that I created for topics like on this, you can find the website pinggroup.org. On there, I've got a lot of free resources for anyone. So a communication styles tool where you can see what your communication style is, a team norming tool that relates to our topic about how do you get on the same page of communication as a team. So feel free to check that out for some resources.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I'm super grateful for the time today. Enjoyed learning and shooting different ideas around. I look forward to watching and learning from you in the future. Thanks for being a part of the show today.
Great. It was an awesome conversation.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.